It was a sunny day filled with joy. Valentina, just 8 years old, was about to experience what should have been one of the happiest moments of her childhood, her birthday at Disneyland, the place of any child's dreams. Alongside her mother, Laura, she ran between attractions, her face alight with excitement. The sounds of the park, laughter, music, and screams of joy set the perfect backdrop for that special day. Laura watched her daughter enchanted, her heart warming at seeing her little girl so happy. Every smile Valentina gave her felt like a gift, and in that moment, nothing could go wrong. While waiting in line for one of the most popular roller coasters, Laura received a call from her sister. She answered briefly, distracted, never imagining that this simple gesture would change her life forever. On the other end of the line, the conversation was brief and banal, but that brief pause was enough for fate to take a tragic turn. When Laura hung up the phone and looked away, Valentina was gone. At first, he thought his daughter had gone ahead to see another attraction. He called her name, looked around, and took a few steps forward, but she didn't respond. Confusion set in. The park, once joyful and vibrant, began to feel immense and suffocating. Laura's heart raced, and her voice began to tremble as she desperately screamed for Valentina. People nearby noticed her desperation, staff were called, and security began searching. The park's festive music contrasted with the growing anguish of the mother who, in a matter of seconds, had lost what she loved most. The perfect day had turned into a nightmare without warning. Laura ran between attractions, asking everyone if they'd seen a little girl in a colorful dress with a charming smile. Every second felt like an eternity. The joy that once filled the air was now replaced by tension, fear, and a deafening silence inside the heart of a mother who no longer knew where to look. If you want to know what happened to Valentina after that terrible day, subscribe to the channel, like it, and turn on notifications. The story will continue, and what comes next is simply unmissable. The park, once filled with joy, music, and laughter, turned into silent chaos when Laura realized her daughter was missing. Within minutes, the festive atmosphere gave way to panic. Laura ran among the people, shouting Valentina's name, trying to get some response, some look that would show her daughter was still nearby. The sounds of the attractions continued, but to her, everything seemed distant, muffled, as if the world around her had lost its meaning. Her heart was pounding, and she felt short of breath. Park officials were alerted, and security quickly mobilized. News of a missing child spread quickly. Visitors began to gather around, curious, while loudspeakers discreetly announced that the gates were being monitored. With each passing minute, Laura's anguish grew as she insistently searched every corner, every row, every aisle. Her mother called her daughter's name with a choked voice, clinging to the hope of hearing an answer, but silence was the only thing that returned. Soon, the police arrived at the scene. Uniformed officers took control of the situation, cordoning off areas, urging calm, and gathering information. Laura could barely speak. Her words came out in sobs, trying to describe Valentina's colorful dress, her white shoes, the small Mickey Mouse necklace she wore on that special day. The officers began to act quickly. Security cameras were reviewed one by one, and the footage showed Valentina walking alongside her mother toward the roller coaster. It was around 4:30 in the afternoon. After that, nothing, no record, no visual clues to indicate where she had gone. It was as if Valentina had simply disappeared from the map, swallowed up by the crowd. Investigators revisited the footage several times, from different angles, searching for details that might have been overlooked. Nothing. The 8-year-old girl seemed to have dissolved into the sea of people. Witness accounts only added to the confusion. One couple claimed to have seen her in the roller coaster line minutes before her disappearance. Another woman said she believed she had seen her near a souvenir shop, but couldn't remember the exact time. An employee mentioned seeing a similar child playing near one of the park's secondary exits, but the cameras in that area were undergoing maintenance. Every clue led to a dead end, and the contradictions made it impossible to draw a clear line of events. With each passing hour, Laura's desperation grew. She refused to leave the park, begging to keep searching even as night began to fall. The lights of Disneyland, once a symbol of enchantment and fantasy, now seemed to mock the pain of a mother who no longer had the strength to cry. Police, security guards, and volunteers swept the area throughout the early hours. No sign, no clothing, no trace of the girl. In the following days, the investigation intensified. Flyers with Valentina's photo were distributed. Local television stations broadcast the case. And the story of the missing girl in the happiest place on earth moved everyone. Phone lines were opened, and hundreds of people called claiming to have information, but none of it led to anything concrete. The media demanded answers, but the police were at a loss. Weeks passed, and the search began to slow. The lack of evidence or real clues made everything even more cruel. Laura refused to accept the authorities. Silence. She went to the police station every day, insisting on new searches, asking to watch the footage over and over again. The images always ended at the same point, 4:30 p.m. A smiling girl in line for a roller coaster and then nothing. Months later, the case was officially closed. Authorities declared there were insufficient leads to continue. The kidnapping hypothesis was mentioned, but without concrete evidence. For Laura, those words sounded like a sentence. She couldn't understand how a child could disappear in a place teeming with cameras, tourists, and security guards. The park returned to normal. Families continued visiting. Laughter echoed through the brightly lit corridors. But for Laura, nothing would ever be normal again. The pain settled silently, like a permanent shadow. Valentina's room remained untouched. Mickey's necklace, the memento from their last birthday, still hung on the wall, a cruel reminder of what had been lost. Life went on, but Laura remained frozen in time, reliving that moment when she answered the phone and, without realizing it, watched fate take away what she loved most. And that was how Valentina's affair ended, or at least, it seemed to have ended. 13 years had passed since the day Valentina disappeared at Disneyland. 13 long years marked by silence, loneliness, and a pain that time refused to heal. To the world, the case had been closed. The newspapers stopped reporting it, the authorities had moved on, and the park continued to welcome thousands of visitors every day, as if nothing had happened. But for Laura, time had stopped at that very moment when she turned around and realized her daughter was no longer by her side. In the first months after her disappearance, she believed it was all just a matter of time. You'd think the police would find some clue, that someone would call with useful information, that perhaps Valentina had been taken by mistake and would return home. Each morning, Laura woke hoping to hear the phone ring, to receive news, to see her daughter's face plastered across the television screens with the caption, "Found alive." But the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into years. The house, once filled with laughter and children's sounds, fell silent. Valentina's room remained untouched, as if she would return at any moment. The pink curtains, the teddy bear on the bed, the Mickey Mouse necklace hanging from the mirror, all were frozen memories of a time that would never return. Laura refused to change anything, as if moving the space meant accepting that her daughter truly would not return. As the years passed, Laura aged rapidly. Fatigue and sadness left deep marks on her face. Dark circles under her eyes became permanent, and the sparkle in her eyes that once reflected joy now held only melancholy. Every birthday, she lit a candle, made the cake, and waited alone. It was her ritual, the only way to keep her daughter's presence alive. Hope, however, began to fade. Friends and family, once supportive, began to drift away, believing Laura needed to move on. Many told her she needed to accept reality, that it was time to let bygones be bygones. But how could she move on when her heart was still stuck on that day? How could she accept the absence of someone who was never truly found? Time, instead of healing, only deepened the wound. Every birthday, every Christmas, every special occasion was a painful reminder of all that had been lost. Laura grew accustomed to the silence, the waiting, and the solitude. People stopped asking about the case. The headlines faded, and Valentina's name became just a distant memory, an echo of a tragedy the world chose to forget. On the outside, Laura seemed like an ordinary woman. She worked, paid the bills, followed her routine. But inside, she was a soul trapped in the past. The sound of children's laughter still made her shiver. She avoided parks, crowds, any place that might bring back memories of that fateful day. Sometimes, at night, she would sit on the couch and review the few photos she still had. Valentina smiling with her hair in 2 braids, holding a balloon, with the innocent look of someone who believed the world was safe. The authorities no longer answered her calls. The investigations had been shelved, the files gathered and forgotten in some warehouse. For Laura, the lack of answers was crueler than the truth, because doubt, that silent shadow, never let her sleep. Every night, before closing her eyes, The same question echoed in her mind. Where is my daughter? Time didn't erase anything. On the contrary, it solidified the pain, transforming it into an inseparable part of Laura's life. Her daughter's face, once remembered with tenderness, now appeared in her dreams, in distorted fragments, in images that blended past and fear. She would wake with a start, feeling the emptiness beside her in bed, as if absence had become a constant presence. The years passed, the world changed, but Laura remained there, where it all ended. Sometimes she walked the streets and saw girls the age Valentina would be now. She tried to imagine what their voice would sound like, the tone of their laughter, the color of their hair. She tried to imagine if she still remembered her mother, if she was alive, if she still wore the Mickey Mouse necklace she'd gotten on that last birthday. On the living room wall, a framed photo of Valentina smiling still hung. The image, faded by time, was Laura's last link to the life she had lost. Every morning, she would stand before the photo and murmur the same words she had repeated for 13 years. I'm still here, waiting for you. But the waiting, the silence, and the longing blended together until they became one, an invisible weight that Laura carried every day. Because, as she herself said in a bitter whisper, time didn't last at all, only the void became deeper. 13 years after Valentina's disappearance, the case had been completely forgotten by most. The park continued to operate with the same joy as ever, welcoming families, tourists, and children who laughed delightedly, unaware that this place hid a history of pain and mystery. But one ordinary summer day, something happened that would change everything. A young employee, recently hired by Disneyland's Maintenance and Archives Department, was assigned to organize a series of old boxes stored in a warehouse deep beneath the park. It was monotonous, almost invisible work, but he never imagined that inside one of those dusty boxes he would find one of the greatest keys to an unsolved mystery. The young man spent hours sorting through documents, records of former employees, security reports, and forgotten objects. The boxes were covered in years of dust, and many didn't even have legible labels. Amidst this repetitive work, one of them caught his eye. It was different from the others. Older, with a faded security department seal and a small, barely legible label that read special cases. Curiosity got the better of him. He carefully opened the lid, never imagining what he would find inside. As he removed the first papers, the employee saw a folder marked 1999. Inside were old photos, internal investigation documents, and a small plastic bag that appeared to contain something personal. He pulled the bag open and found a necklace with a Mickey Mouse pendant, worn with age but still recognizable. In the same folder was a photograph, a smiling girl with brown hair and bright eyes, wearing the same necklace. It was Valentina, on the day of her disappearance. For a moment, the boy stood still. The name sounded familiar, as if he'd heard something about the case long ago, perhaps in an old news report. He leafed through the papers and found, folded between them, a handwritten note on yellowed paper. The letters, firm but shaky, read, "The girl is in the right place, but the place is not right." The phrase echoed in his mind, charged with mystery. He didn't immediately understand what it meant, but something in his instinct told him the message was important. Restless, the young man began investigating on his own. He rummaged through the rest of the box and noticed records of internal park investigations into unsolved incidents involving visitors and employees. Among them were several mentions of a missing child from the summer of 1999. Everything pointed to Valentina's case. He knew this couldn't be just a coincidence. In the following days, the young man couldn't get the story out of his head. He dreamed of the girl's image, the necklace, and the phrase written on the note. The mystery consumed him. Finally, he decided he had to act. He took the box to his supervisor, who, alarmed by the contents, contacted local authorities. It was the first time in over a decade that anyone had officially spoken about Valentina's disappearance. When the news reached the police, investigators who still remembered the case were shocked. The box had been forgotten in an internal storage room at the park for all those years, and no one seemed to know of its existence. Authorities carefully examined the items. The photo was authenticated. It had indeed been taken on the day of Valentina's visit to the park, and the necklace was identified as the birthday gift Laura had mentioned numerous times during the original investigation. But what intrigued everyone most was the note. Who had written it? And what did it mean to say the girl was in the right place? The riddle seemed to mock time, as if someone wanted to leave a purposeful clue, but only when the time was right. With the discovery, The police decided to reopen the case, and the first person they needed to contact was Laura. When the phone rang that afternoon, she couldn't believe what she was hearing. The voice on the other end was calm, but firm. The investigator said new evidence had been found, and that it might be important to Valentina's case. Laura was silent for a few seconds, her heart racing, her hands shaking. For a moment, she felt the same chill down her spine she had felt 13 years earlier, when her daughter disappeared. Her mind filled with questions, memories, and fear. Had they finally found something that could reveal what happened? Or was this just another false hope, like so many others over the years? Still, she accepted the invitation to come to the police station and see what they had discovered. That night, Laura could barely sleep. She spent hours mentally reviewing every detail of that day in 1999, every face, every sound, every moment she looked back and no longer saw her daughter. Now, a box forgotten in time brought back everything she tried to bury inside herself. The park, the necklace, the photo, and especially that phrase, a message that seemed to carry a secret the world had ignored for too long. As the sun rose, Laura knew that what came next would change her life forever. The 13-year silence was about to be broken, and the truth was finally beginning to move through the shadows of the past. The reopening of Valentina's case in 2012 brought with it a wave of anticipation and suspicion. After years of silence, the discovery of the box containing the girl's photo and Mickey's necklace, as well as the mysterious note indicating that she might be in the right place, but the place wasn't right, had rekindled hope that the truth about her disappearance might finally be revealed. However, what came next was even more surprising and disconcerting than anyone could have imagined. In an effort to re-examine all the evidence and records, police began combing through the park's security files. Disneyland's surveillance cameras have always been a crucial security resource, and now, with the case reopened, they would be a vital tool in understanding what really happened to Valentina. When investigators began reviewing the recordings from that day in 1999, they were unaware that they were about to make a discovery that would change the course of the investigation. The initial images were ordinary, showing the usual movement of guests, staffs, and attractions in operation. At a certain point, however, something caught the eye. Footage from one of the park's security cameras, positioned at a specific angle near the roller coaster where Valentina had disappeared, revealed a moment no one had noticed before. The footage showed Valentina walking with a woman who didn't appear to be her mother. The child appeared calm, smiling and talking to the mysterious figure, but what really caught the investigators' attention was where they were headed. Instead of heading to one of the park's open areas, as any normal visitor would, the footage showed the two heading toward a restricted area outside the park's boundaries, where tourists and visitors were not allowed. The woman seemed to know the route and strategically chose the most secluded and quiet corridors, as if deliberately distancing herself from public view. The moment the footage showed the two women moving away from the camera's view, a sense of unease spread among the investigators. Something was wrong. The footage clearly showed an attempt at concealment, and the child, who seemed so carefree, was walking toward a place she should never have been. Most alarming, however, was the area the images indicated they were heading to, an area not shown on park maps, a forgotten and isolated area, far from the eyes of visitors. Park records and documents confirmed what the footage showed. This area was not open to the public and, according to staff, was marked as a restricted access zone, an area under construction, designated for renovations, and never actually used by visitors. The name given to this area was what caused the most surprise: El Rincón Secreto, the secret corner. This name, which had not appeared in any previous investigation, immediately sparked a wave of speculation. What could this secret corner be? Why were Valentina and the woman heading there? Based on the footage, it was clear that Valentina had been taken to this hidden location, where the security cameras, as an intentional part of the park's surveillance, were not equipped to capture details of her presence. But what frightened investigators most was the possibility that she had not simply been the victim of a random abduction. Questions began to arise. Could Valentina have been hidden within the park itself? Could she have been kept there for so long without anyone knowing? The mystery surrounding the secret corner seemed to grow as more details emerged. How could such a secluded and secret space exist within one of the world's most visited amusement parks? And how could an unknown woman have taken Valentina there without any of the security guards or surveillance cameras noticing? It wasn't possible that someone had acted alone. Suspicions began to arise that there might be a network within the park itself, an organization manipulating events behind Disney's back, using this secluded location to hide children away from the prying eyes of tourists. The investigation team, now with the discovery of the secret corner, was forced to reconsider the nature of the case. Until then, the idea that Valentina might have been abducted by a stranger outside the park seemed the most likely hypothesis. However, this new clue called everything into question. Who was this woman? What did she want with Valentina? And, most importantly, why did she take her to this secluded spot within Disneyland itself? Authorities began questioning former employees, revisiting records of who had access to the restricted area, and searching for any possible link between El Rincón Secreto and the years leading up to Valentina's disappearance. The initial impression was that someone inside the park had somehow orchestrated the kidnapping, but who could be so involved as to have access to this restricted area and the power to make a child disappear without a trace? The clues began to connect in unexpected ways, but the biggest question remained. What exactly was going on in that secret corner? Who was behind this hideout? And why had no one ever suspected its existence before? The investigation took a new turn, and answers were closer, but the pieces of the puzzle remained scattered, leaving everyone with the feeling that something much larger was at play. The investigation into Valentina's disappearance, which had already taken an unexpected turn with the discovery of the hidden recording and the mysterious secret corner, now deepened even further with the revelation of a key figure who appeared to have been behind it all. While analyzing the park's security records and old documents that had begun to emerge, investigators discovered the name of a woman, María Ruiz, who had not been mentioned in previous investigations. She was identified as a former park security employee, and her connection to Valentina's case did not appear to be a mere coincidence. Ana Maria had worked as a park security supervisor at the time of Valentina's disappearance. She was a respected employee, known for her dedication and, apparently, her ability to maintain order within the park. However, what no one knew at the time was that she was hiding secrets that, if revealed, could change everything. Ana Maria was fired shortly after Valentina's disappearance, but until then, no one knew the exact reason for her dismissal. Initially, it was thought she had been let go for personal reasons, but the truth was much darker. Further investigation into Ana Maria's life began to uncover a history of suspicious activity. Documents found in security records indicated that, before being hired to work at Disneyland, she had already been involved in several incidents of forgery and theft. Her performance as a security officer did not appear to have been as flawless as everyone had imagined. Furthermore, police discovered that, during her years working at the park, Ana Maria had numerous contacts with individuals linked to criminal organizations. Her pattern of behavior raised significant suspicions, especially when a more direct link to child trafficking began to emerge. Ana Maria had previously been investigated for minor offenses, such as document forgery and involvement in robbery schemes, but these cases had never been treated as major ones. What no one knew was that her ties to organized crime ran deeper than they seemed. Through a thorough analysis of her bank records and her communications with certain individuals, the police uncovered a child trafficking ring of which Ana Maria was a part. She wasn't just a park employee, she was involved in a network operating within Disneyland, using her position of trust to facilitate the transportation and hiding of missing children. The park, that magical and seemingly safe place, had become, for some children, a nightmare scenario. Valentina, at one point, had been one of the targets of this network. The revelation that Ana Maria was involved in child trafficking was a devastating shock to everyone involved in the investigation. Pain and fear grew as investigators realized the magnitude of what was at stake. How could a woman who worked within park security, with access to restricted areas and surveillance cameras, have gone undetected for so long? She could have been part of a much larger scheme, with connections that extended beyond Disneyland, involving international criminal networks. The most disturbing discovery came when a letter signed by Ana Maria was found among her mother's old belongings during a new search of her home. The letter was dated 1999, shortly before Valentina disappeared. The content was disturbing, a message written in large letters, as if it were an enigmatic message, with no clear explanation. The letter read, "The girl will be safe. What is to come will change everything." What did this phrase mean? To many, it seemed like a direct message about Valentina's future, as if Ana Maria had knowledge of something that had not yet happened. The reference to what was to come indicated that she already knew of a plan that was underway, a plan that would change the fate of many children, including Valentina. The letter was full of ambiguity and mystery, But researchers began to understand that this was no simple farewell letter or a solitary reflection. It was a code, a clue Ana Maria was leaving behind, or perhaps even a veiled threat. The letter only heightened the suspense surrounding the case. If Ana Maria knew what was coming, it implied she had some kind of control over the situation. But what exactly did she know? And what had been planned for Valentina and other children who, like her, became victims of a shadowy and deadly network? The letter not only reinforced suspicions of Ana Maria's involvement in trafficking, but also revealed that she had been a central figure in the scheme to hide children inside the park, likely as part of a larger plan to traffic these children elsewhere. Ana María Ruiz's name was now at the center of the investigation, and her connection to Valentina's disappearance seemed increasingly clear. Investigators began focusing on her, trying to learn more about her life before and after her time in the park, to understand how she became involved in this macabre game. Meanwhile, another question lingered. Where was Ana Maria now, and what did she know about Valentina's fate? With each discovery, the mystery deepened and the answers grew more distant. Valentina's case was far from solved. But one thing was clear: the pieces of this puzzle were all connected, and Ana María Ruiz held the key to understanding what really happened to the missing child and many other victims the world seemed to have forgotten. The investigation into Valentina's disappearance reached a point no one expected. The name of Ana María Ruiz, a former park security employee, had reignited the case, but what she was about to reveal surpassed any hypothesis the police had imagined. After days of searches and interrogations, Ana Maria was located living in a small coastal town, far from the spotlight and the life she had led in the past. When investigators finally managed to bring her in to testify, the atmosphere was tense and disbelieving. Valentina's case, long forgotten, was about to expose something much darker, something that would transform Disneyland's perfect image into a horror scenario. At the beginning of the interrogation, Ana Maria denied any direct involvement in the girl's disappearance. She said she remembered the case, that she knew Valentina's story, but that she had never had contact with her beyond seeing her from afar on the day of the incident. Her demeanor was calm, almost cold, and her answers seemed rehearsed. However, as investigators pressed with new evidence, the recording, the note found, and the records of access to the restricted area, her control began to slip. It was then, between pauses and uneasy glances, that Ana Maria confessed something that would completely change the course of the investigation. Disneyland had been used for years as a front for an international child trafficking ring. Her words landed like a blow. The investigators looked at each other, unable to react immediately. According to Ana Maria, within the park, there was a group of influential individuals with privileged access to restricted areas, operating silently in the shadow of official operations. The objective was clear: to identify, select, and capture children who fit certain profiles. Children from tourist families, with few local ties, became the easiest targets. She explained that the park's structure and constant flow of people made a child's disappearance easier to cover up than anywhere else. Ana Maria maintained that she never directly participated in the kidnappings, but admitted that she was responsible for coordinating access to prohibited areas, manipulating records, and diverting the attention of surveillance teams. According to her, there was a well-defined hierarchy. While some were in charge of recruiting the victims, others handled transportation and maintenance of the hiding places. And it was at this point that a new name emerged: the Secret Refuge. According to his confession, this refuge was an isolated location, built outside the park boundaries but still within company-owned property. Officially, the space was registered as a former decommissioned maintenance area, used solely for storing old equipment. In practice, it served as a hiding place for the abducted children before they were transported out of the country. The place was protected by layers of security, with fake cameras, hired guards, and access restricted to a few members of the group's inner circle. No ordinary visitor even imagined that, behind fences and abandoned corridors, lay a confinement space. Ana Maria described the place in detail. She said the shelter was underground, cold and silent. It had long, narrow corridors, iron doors with internal locks, and makeshift rooms where the children were kept, separated from each other. She said the victims stayed there for weeks, sometimes months, until they were sent to final destinations: fake shelters, undercover orphanages, or clandestine transports that took them to other countries. Everything was done with surgical precision, as if it were a military operation. Escape routes were mapped out so as not to arouse suspicion, and the staff involved in the scheme were paid generous sums to maintain their silence. The group was made up of people from diverse backgrounds, from former park employees to business people and outside agents who used their influence to maintain secrecy. Codes, encrypted communications, and even symbolic language were used in internal records. Ana Maria stated that she never knew exactly who the group's leader was, but mentioned that some of those involved were high-ranking, untouchable figures with enough power to manipulate documents and even impede investigations. The most disturbing thing about her testimony was the way she spoke about the shelter. There was no emotion in her voice, just a cold, almost bureaucratic description, as if she were describing the workings of some structure. However, at a certain point, she stopped, took a deep breath, and said something that made everyone in the room fall silent. Valentina was there. I saw her. It was the first time she admitted to having had direct contact with the girl. According to her, Valentina had been taken to the shelter the same day she disappeared, but what happened after that, she refused to say. Ana Maria's testimony deeply shocked investigators. If her words were true, Valentina's case was not an isolated incident but rather part of a much larger network that had operated undetected for years. Police began to draw connections between past disappearances of other children at theme parks and similar events in different countries. Everything seemed to fit together in a dark and frightening way. Even with so many revelations, doubts still lingered about the extent of Ana Maria's involvement. Was she a repentant accomplice or just another cog in a monstrous machine? Every sentence she uttered seemed to raise new questions. What really happened in that secret refuge? Who else knew of its existence? And, above all, what was the true fate of the children taken there? As authorities struggled to digest the weight of their confessions, one thing became clear. Valentina's disappearance was just the tip of a colossal iceberg, and the emerging truth threatened to shatter the illusion of safety surrounding the world's most famous park. The secret refuge existed, and now investigators needed to find it before silence enveloped everything again. The impact of Ana María Ruiz's revelations about the existence of a child trafficking ring operating behind Disneyland's glittering facades had left investigators in shock. The mention of a secret refuge, a secluded location outside the park's boundaries where missing children were kept, completely changed the course of the investigation. Now, the mystery was no longer just Valentina's disappearance, but the existence of a criminal organization that, for years, had operated silently without arousing suspicion. Even so, despite the confessions and clues, the most important thing remained: locating the refuge. It was the missing link to confirm everything Ana Maria had said, and, who knows, perhaps, find Valentina after all these years. The following weeks were marked by intense and silent work. The police formed a special team dedicated exclusively to the hunt for this mysterious location. Each day, new files were searched, records of properties near the park were analyzed, and former employees were re-interviewed. However, all trails seemed to end in nothing. The secret refuge was a shadow, a whispered word amid fragmented documents and distorted memories. Until, one autumn morning, the story took an unexpected turn. An anonymous informant contacted authorities. The voice on the other end was hoarse, halting, and carried the weight of someone who knew too much. The man claimed to have worked indirectly with the network and claimed to know the exact location where the safe house was hidden. He didn't reveal his identity, simply stating that he could no longer bear the burden of guilt. According to him, the safe house was in a rural area, a few kilometers from the park, disguised as an abandoned warehouse. The coordinates were accurately noted, and the police acted immediately. Within hours, a covert operation was mounted. Unmarked cars and special forces surrounded the perimeter as night fell. The atmosphere was tense. No one knew what they would find inside. When the team stormed the site, the scene was far worse than anyone had imagined. What appeared to be a simple warehouse was actually an underground complex with long corridors, damp walls, and rusted metal doors. The air was thick, filled with mold and silence. In the small, locked rooms, the team found several children, some very young, others teenagers, all in a state of shock, malnourished and confused. Many had been there so long they couldn't even remember their names. The rescue was chaotic and emotional. The medical team rushed in to provide assistance, while the agents tried to calm the crying children, unable to understand what was happening. The horror of that place seemed endless, but amidst all the devastation, One discovery in particular caught everyone's attention. In one of the rooms, nearly hidden beneath a pile of papers and old toys, investigators found a wooden box. Inside were small personal items: a child's bracelet, a hair bow, and a handwritten letter. The paper was yellowed and worn with age, but the words were still legible. It was a letter signed by Valentina. The shaky, childlike handwriting made everyone in the room's heart ache. She wrote, "I'm here, but I'm afraid. Someday someone will find me." The room fell into absolute silence. That simple sentence carried an indescribable weight, confirmation that Valentina had been there, alive, conscious, and waiting to be rescued. The paper was carefully collected and sent for analysis, but the emotional impact had already been felt by everyone. Laura was immediately informed of the discovery. Upon hearing the letter's contents, she burst into tears. For 13 years, she had waited for any sign that her daughter might still be alive. Now, that piece of paper became irrefutable proof that Valentina existed, that she had resisted, and, above all, believed she would be found. The letter rekindled hope and at the same time deepened the mystery. Where was Valentina now? If she had left that message, why wasn't she among the rescued children? Questions cascaded, and the police knew they weren't finished yet. Inside the shelter, other clues began to emerge: maps, records of names, coded lists, and, in one of the hidden files, mention of a second location, a containment residence, as they called it. The documents indicated that this residence was the final stop of the operation, the place where the most valuable children were taken before disappearing for good. The coordinates led to a coastal area, far from the city, where an old, isolated mansion was registered to a shell company. Authorities understood that this was the final clue, the group's last hiding place, the place where they might finally find Valentina. Wasting no time, the teams organized for a new raid. The mission, now called Operation Finale, would be decisive. Helicopters began circling the coastal area while ground units advanced along the winding roads leading to the estate. The mansion, reportedly, sat high on a hill surrounded by dense trees and ancient stone walls. From a distance, it was almost invisible, as if time and isolation had erased its existence. The sun was already beginning to set as the agents took up positions, preparing to enter. The cold ocean wind cut through the silence, and everyone knew that night would change everything. Every step, every breath was marked by a mixture of fear and hope. Within that mansion lay the final piece of a puzzle that had tormented a mother and shocked a nation. And there, somewhere within those walls, perhaps still lay the answer to the greatest mystery of all, Valentina's fate. Night was falling over the coast as the operation reached its climax. The mansion, isolated on a hilltop surrounded by ancient trees and dense vegetation, seemed unnaturally silent. It was as if time had stopped there, freezing every stone, every shadow, and every breath. The sound of waves crashing against distant rocks mingled with the subdued hum of police radios. Outside, the tactical teams awaited the final command. The moment had arrived. After years of mystery, clues, and suffering, the truth was about to be revealed. At the captain's signal, the operation began. The main door was forcefully smashed open, echoing through the large, empty hall. The agents fanned out into the dark corridors, illuminating their way with flashlights. The air was heavy, permeated with a damp smell, and the silence was almost suffocating. The mansion, though imposing, appeared abandoned, but there were subtle signs that someone lived there. Food scraps, discarded clothing, and lit candles in specific corners. Tension mounted with every step as the agents searched room by room, weapons raised and hearts racing. Suddenly, a voice over the radio broke the silence. One of the officers had found something. In the mansion's basement, hidden behind a false wall, was a narrow passageway that led to a hallway. The walls were cold, and the cement floor bore the marks of recent footprints. Following the hallway, the officers reached a small room lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, and it was there, huddled in a corner, that they found Valentina. The girl, now a young woman, was alive. Her eyes, wide and frightened, reflected years of suffering and isolation. Her thin body, simple clothes, and lost expression told a story of pain that words could not describe. When the officers called her name, she did not react immediately. She seemed confused, unable to distinguish between reality and memory. One of them approached slowly, saying her name in a low voice. It was at that moment that she looked up. The flashlight's beam illuminated her face, and for a moment, Time seemed to stand still. The news quickly reached the surface. Laura, who had been held in a nearby vehicle, waited anxiously, unsure of what they would find. When one of the officers approached and whispered, "We found her," she collapsed. Tears streamed down her face before she could even move. She ran through the mansion's gate in despair, running up the stairs, as if all the years of pain had been concentrated in that moment. When he entered the room, the entire world seemed to disappear. There stood Valentina, alive, fragile but real. For a moment, mother and daughter stared at each other without saying anything. Laura stepped forward hesitantly, fearing it was just another dream about to be shattered. But when Valentina recognized her, something inside her broke. With a sob, she stood and ran into her mother's arms. The embrace was long, intense, filled with years of absence, fear, and suppressed love. Laura's tears fell onto her daughter's hair, while Valentina trembled, unsure if it was true. Silence filled the room, a silence that spoke louder than any words. It was the reunion that fate had postponed for over a decade, a moment when time, suffering, and distance merged into a single instant of redemption. The police officers, moved, remained silent, respecting the scene before them. Some looked away, unable to contain their emotion. It was impossible not to feel touched. That embrace represented the end of a search that seemed impossible. Mother and daughter remained united for long minutes, as if trying to recover every fragment of the lost years. When Laura finally managed to speak, her voice was a whisper. She said Valentina's name several times, as if to reassure her that she was truly there. Valentina, for her part, just cried, repeating a single phrase, "I knew you would come back." It was in that moment that Laura understood the true meaning of hope, the kind that endures time, pain, and absence. Slowly, the doctors approached to tend to Valentina. She was covered with a blanket, and Laura remained by her side the entire time, holding her hand tightly. Outside, sirens began to wail, but nothing else mattered. This moment was theirs, and theirs alone. The story that began as a nightmare seemed to finally find a spark of light. The girl who disappeared in the happiest place on Earth had been found in one of the darkest places on Earth, and though the wounds were deep, the reunion proved that a mother's love is stronger than any darkness. As dawn broke on the horizon, Laura looked at her daughter and whispered the words that would remain with her forever. El tiempo no las separó, solo las hizo más fuertes. The dawn that followed the operation felt different. The cool morning breeze carried a sense of relief, but also of something unfinished. The coastal mansion, the scene of Laura and Valentina's reunion, was now also the epicenter of an investigation that was becoming international. In the hours following the raid, dozens of people were arrested. Police, federal agents, and investigators from different countries began working together to track down everyone involved in the network that had operated in the shadows for years. María Ruiz was one of the first to be officially arrested, along with former park employees and accomplices who provided logistical support. The news spread around the world. Headlines described the case as one of the largest anti-child trafficking operations ever recorded. The interrogations revealed shocking details. It was discovered that the network used structures inside and outside Disneyland to capture, hide, and transport children to various destinations. Those involved acted with precision, taking advantage of the park's constant movement and the anonymity afforded by the crowds. The group's downfall was a direct result of Laura's persistence and Valentina's courage, who, even after years of silence, left clues that finally led to her release. Justice, albeit late, was beginning to be served. With the dismantling of the organization, a long and painful process of reconstruction began. Valentina was taken to a specialized hospital, where she received intensive medical and psychological care. Tests showed that she had suffered physically and emotionally for a prolonged period, but the most delicate diagnosis came not from her body, but from her mind. The scars of captivity were deeply etched in her memory. In the early days, she barely spoke. She avoided people's gaze and reacted with fear to sudden sounds and movements. The doctors explained to Laura that the healing process would be slow, that Valentina would have to relearn how to trust, how to dream, and, most importantly, how to feel safe again. Laura, for her part, wavered between guilt and gratitude. Guilt for having been distracted on that fateful day, for not having been there when her daughter needed her most. Gratitude for, against all odds, having her back. Every time she looked at Valentina, she felt an indescribable mixture of pain and relief. It was difficult to accept that the girl she had left in a park full of color and joy had spent more than a decade in the shadows, silently fighting for survival. Yet there was an invisible force that held them together. Laura vowed that, this time, she would never let fear win again. Over time, Valentina began to show the first signs of recovery. A shy smile appeared here and there. A firmer gaze, a more confident step. Therapy sessions became daily, and professionals developed gentle methods to help her reconstruct her memories without reliving the trauma. Laura accompanied each step, sitting beside her daughter, holding her hand, even when silence fell over the room. Her mother's constant and serene presence became the anchor Valentina needed to begin her rebirth. While justice took its course, with lengthy trials and worldwide repercussions, Laura and Valentina opted for a low-key life. They left the city and moved to a small place near the sea. There, far from the hustle and bustle, they began to rebuild a simple routine. They walked the beach, watched the sunset, and let the sound of the waves replace the dark memories. Little by little, the girl who had been kidnapped began to transform into a young woman determined to live. Symbolic photographs marked this period. In one, the two walked barefoot on the sand, hand in hand, the wind blowing through their hair. In another, a single colorful balloon was attached to a park bench, a reminder that Valentina's childhood had been interrupted but not destroyed. And perhaps most significantly, an image of a Mickey Mouse necklace resting on a wooden table. It was no longer a symbol of pain, but of resilience, a reminder that, despite everything, she had survived. Laura began collaborating with organizations that supported victims of trafficking and child disappearances. She used her voice to alert other families and strengthen protection initiatives. Her testimony became a reference, not for sensationalism, but for hope. At each talk, she repeated the same phrase that had guided her years of searching: never stop searching, because sometimes, even silence carries an answer. Valentina, for her part, began studying at home. Under the guidance of psychologists and private tutors, she rediscovered her love of reading and, over time, began writing short pieces about courage and overcoming adversity. There were still nightmares. There were still days when fear overcame her. But now she had something she hadn't had before: a safe home and her mother's unwavering love. Valentina's case became a global symbol of resistance. Images that once represented horror were now used to convey hope. The balloon, the necklace, the sea. No faces were shown, only gestures, colors, and symbols, because the true story didn't need faces to be remembered, only a feeling that, even in the deepest darkness, the light of truth and love always finds a way. Valentina's case wasn't just a story of disappearance and mystery. It was a story of love, perseverance, and the unbreakable strength of a mother who refused to give up. For 13 years, Laura lived between hope and despair, trapped by memories that never left her. She searched for answers when everyone else had given up, faced the indifference of authorities and the weight of time, but never lost her faith. In the end, it was this faith, fueled by a love that knows no bounds, that broke the silence and brought the truth to light. A mother's love can conquer even the darkest silence. Valentina's story is a reminder that life can change in an instant, and that no place, no matter how joyful it may seem, is free from danger. It's also a lesson in vigilance and care, in the need to be attentive, protect, and cherish those we love. But above all, it's a story of hope, the kind that endures time, fear, and pain. Laura showed the world that true love is stronger than any tragedy, and that even when all seems lost, a mother's strength can defy the impossible. When we look at this story, it's impossible not to reflect on the power of human persistence and the value of empathy. How many other mothers today experience the same torment Laura faced? How many children wait to be found, forgotten by the world but not by the hearts of those who love them? Justice may bring answers, but it is love that brings healing. The reunion between mother and daughter didn't erase the years of pain, but it proved that where there is love, there is always a way back. And now, I ask you, what would you do if you were Laura? Would you have the strength to keep searching, even when everyone said there was no hope? If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel, like it, and turn on notifications. There's much more to come. Stories of courage, mystery, and resilience that show that even in the deepest shadows, there's always a light waiting to be found. This story isn't over yet, and what follows is simply unmissable. fade out with a soft and moving song, closing the sound of a story that will never be forgotten.